Yeah, we'll have a chat
Just want to let you know there's a light here, so just don't stand on camera, but on the side is fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to hand over to our intro hostess, Isabella Charlotte Obvious, who is ambassador for One Tree Planted, works very much in the sustainability field, but across fashion, and she's also a journalist, a presenter, and a broadcaster. So over to you, Isabella.
Thank you, Natalia. Welcome everyone. Welcome today. I hope everyone's got their drinks and their sitting comfortably for the Sustainability Talks here today. I want to say first off, thank you to Nikita and Mills Fabrica and Leonie from Tencel Luxe for hosting us today. And as Natalia said, I'm Isabella Charlotte. I'm a fashion ambassador for One Tree Planted and a model and a presenter, so it's very much a great fit that I'm here today, where fashion and sustainability meet. I'm here to introduce to Mary Fellows, moderator for the Sustainability Talks today. I'm going to have to cheat on my notes here because Mary has a very extensive CV, so I'm not going to remember everything off by heart, but she's a former Vogue and Economist editor, and she's worked with 11 Vogues, including the first in a Muslim country, which was Turkish Vogue, has contributed to 53 publications globally on every continent, and lived between New York and LA for 5 years, styling household Hollywood talent. You've also done content creation for digital giants such as Amazon Fashion, Yahoo Style. Celebrity styling is really what gave Mary your birthed your sustainability sort of consulting when you styled Olivia Colman for the Oscars. And this led to her being the founder and CEO of Greenway Studio Sustainability Consulting Platform. So take it away, Mary.
Thank you very much. You're really welcome. I do work in the building, so it's wonderful to be able to help with the talk. And I'm sure all of you know lots about Mills Fabric, but it's been a huge inspiration to me and my team being here. I'm now going to hand over to Nikita to let him do a bit of a better introduction than I can, since he's the GM of Mills Fabric Europe, and you'll be glad you met him once because you'll not be autograph in a few years. But I'll let him take over and then I'll start with the talk.
Hi guys, nice to meet you all. Thank you all for coming. So I'm actually quite new here at the Mills Fabrica. I've only been here for a month and a half, so please bear with me. But previously to that, I was at Parley for the Oceans, heading up partnerships and fashion. So there's a nice sort of like segue into where we are here today. But yeah, I really want to say thank you all here for coming. It's a real honor to be here on stage with Tencel Luxe and the 10 amazing designers who are showcasing downstairs. Today, these designers, along with Tencel Luxe, are really making a big, big statement. You know, they really are a symbol of change for our industry, and I'm sure they'll be the leaders of the future, you know, in sustainability and fashion. As many of you know, the fashion industry is the worst, well, the second worst polluting industry on the planet after oil, and it's our responsibility in this room to help change this. It was innovation that got us here in this mess in the beginning with the climate crisis, and it's going to be creativity coupled with innovation that is going to get us out of this. And it's this which is our core mission here at the Mills Fabrica: investing and nurturing in innovation and innovators and driving a more sustainable future. I mean, there is a saying actually that goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we need to go far, and we want to go together. So what we all need to understand is eco-innovation and sustainability is a journey, and we need to work together to make a change. It's not going to be one person, one individual, one brand. It's going to be a collective and a collaboration to get where we need to be.
Sorry, the screen's not changing.
Oh no, it's fine. I've got some cheat sheets down. But no, we need to really change like mindsets, and we need to change cultures and habits, you know, to really, and even look at the supply chains really. And then we need to figure out ways how to scale the supply chains and make it accessible to everyone, not just the super brands, which I believe Tencel Luxe is doing today.
Trying.
Yeah, for everyone. Yeah, and we're all here today because we've made a conscious or subconscious choice that we want to be part of this journey together. And our aim is to build here at the Mills Fabrica, is to build a community of like-minded people, innovators and startups, and support them through our co-working space, our innovation gallery, as you've seen downstairs already. And last but not least, our investment fund, focus on investing in companies that really want to make systematic change in the fashion industry through innovation and sustainability. So what we do here at the Mills Fabrica is we actually invest in eco-innovation at a technology and a production level through textiles, materials, manufacturing, and supply chain that can help influence the entire industry from every angle, from luxury to fast fashion, to really help move the needle on making the industry better for good. And I really want to say, thank you again for your time and coming here and being part of the movement. And I'm really looking forward to hearing, you know, Tencel Luxe and all of their partners and talking about how they're supporting the journey and the movement going forward. Thanks a lot.
Yes, so first I'm showing Joshua from Love Heroes, Taylor, and Zhao.
Hi everybody, welcome. I'm Mary. So we've got Bav, Josh and Zhao. So the theme of this talk is the sustainability first approach in fashion. I'm sure all of you in the room here understand, as these guys more than anyone, how today's brands, if you start as a fashion brand today, it'd be madness not to start with sustainability at your core, but it's really hard. It can be really hard, and for existing brands who've been out there, we know it's even harder to turn their business models around. So we've got three great heroes in this movement who've shown what can be done with enough will and application. So let's start with you, Bab. I understand, I'm going to look at my cheat sheet as well. I understand that you use a lot of recycled natural materials. A lot of things are made and produced in Italy with a lot of craftsmanship. You have a transparent production and supply chain, and I think you're one of the first brands we picked up at the concept store here at Mills Fabrica. And you've been going for a decade, so tell us about why you decided to take this route into creating a fashion line as opposed to just any other fashion label that's out there.
So I never dreamed of being a designer. My background is luxury fashion marketing, and it was actually during a trip to India with my family back in, I think, 2010 or 11. And it was the first trip that they took me to see where my ancestors were born. And my surname's Taylor, so it's not a marketing strategy. I come from the part of India which is known for dressmaking. And speaking with the suppliers, you know, I tell them I'm from London and I work in Milan as well. And they were like, oh, you know, we have all of these luxury brands that come and use our embroidery and our silks. And then they told me about the sad stories that we all know about. So within the luxury industry, you know, working within marketing and being in front of the press days with, you know, important people like yourselves, I realized that the luxury industry, in particular within fashion, is very, very powerful when it comes to wanting to communicate a global message. So I said to myself, okay, I'm going to launch a sustainable project. I chose clothing instead of bags because it's just, you know, part of my DNA. And I launched the brand. I founded the company in 2013. And to give me a guide, I created my own Conscious 360 manifesto, which became my business model. And I launched my first collection in 2015, and that was the year when the UN goals were launched as well. So I kind of tweaked the manifesto as well to be more in line with them. And here I am nearly 10 years later.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Just tell us one last thing, then we're going to move around. Do you obviously sell direct to consumer? Do you sell through wholesale channels as well?
So I do both direct to consumer and wholesale. So my lovely wholesale team are there, vice versa showroom.
Okay.
So both.
Okay, great. And on to Josh. So, Josh, I understand that you've got quite a lot of big gold stars next to your name. Love Hero is Josh's brand. You're one of the 3 named as the ones to watch in the recent Ravens Sustainability Awards, winner of Making the Cut on telly. You work with Retrace, a cloud blockchain platform. You do a lot of carbon offsetting and 3D digital printing. So what was your route into fashion? Why did you choose to create a business based on those principles, and what have you found as being the successes and either also challenges of doing it?
So my route to fashion was Italy because I am half Italian. I lived there for 7 years playing professional football. And after my career finished, I started making shoes. And that's kind of where I really appreciated the artisanal, the time that goes into making products. So I moved back to Australia where I was originally born, and I launched my first brand. After 7 years, I moved here because I realized I wanted to play with big fish. And I've started working for various bespoke tailors and tailoring for the past 10 years, a lot of big heritage brands. And after that, I realized that during the pandemic, I got made redundant and was casted on this TV show called Making the Cut Season 2. I didn't win. I won many episodes, but I didn't win. Which was great because, I mean, it wasn't great, but it was great because we're about pushing a new narrative with fashion, people and planet, and really doing things the right way. Because in my previous roles, I've always tried to push sustainability, but as a box-ticking exercise. And I've learnt along the way what to do and what not to do. And that's what we're doing now with Love Heroes, really implementing as many pillars as we can to really create a brand that is emotional, has meaning towards it, and is mood boosting with colour and print, bringing colour into people's lives, but doing it the right way so that we are helping Mother Nature also. And we do a lot of things. We blockchain our whole process, we're fully transparent. Our process of making clothes is not just about buying certified fabrics, but also how we print them is waterless. So it's a whole step of the way, really trying to make sure that every step we can do the best we can and lead as example, because we're an open source, and my biggest thing is teaching other designers to do what we do. And I do a lot of talks at colleges, because the more people start to really get onto this bandwagon, the better it's going to be. As Nikita said, it's a collaboration. And sustainability is a journey, it's not a destination, so we're all in this together.
Thank you very much. And Zhao, on to you. So I understand you manufacture, your inputs are as varied as Brazil, Africa and the United Kingdom. You use a lot of fishing nets and other upcycled materials. You're aiming for as fully circular and closed-loop manufacturing business model as you can. And I read your website, Google's talked to all these guys, by the way. And you've been very, very clear about the goals you have. And it's interesting, I think we'll come on to the idea of manifesto in a minute, because it's really interesting also about how a brand can say what it's doing and where it's going. So I was very interested by that. What was your journey into this and why?
I think for me it was very much about I've worked with so many brands and worked in both markets in Brazil, in Italy, I'm also half Italian, and in the UK. And I kind of experienced very different but also quite similar ways of looking at fashion. And it was very much grounded in the idea of a creative director that trickled down ideas, and the whole team would just deliver that. And I very much believe on the opposite. I believe that there is, yes, a creative vision, there is, yes, sustainability driven by values, but it's a journey that has to be taken together. So my approach was always bringing all of the artisans and the people I work with right next to me, and to be very effective in how we've voiced all of their concerns and their ambitions. And it was very much about not assuming what other communities or what people needed or wanted, but very much asking them those questions and making sure that their answers were being heard. So my journey very much touched on that, and about designing clothes that are grounded in the material culture of the place, and that's why it spans across Africa, Brazil, and the UK.
Thank you very much. So I think a question to all three of you is I think that I'm sure one that many in this room and whoever's watching on Instagram, hi to everybody out there, is one of the great challenges for sustainable brands is because to be clean and green, it does cost more. If you do things right, you don't cut corners and have hideous violations of labour rights in your supply chain or be using toxic inputs and materials that are petrochemical or what have you, it does cost more, which is insane, but there we are. So what do you guys say when you're sitting in front of buyers or directly to customers who might maybe DM you, when they say, but how come I can get a t-shirt for $9.99 and yours is £85 or whatever it might be? What kind of answers do you give to either wholesale buyers, other platforms, or customers? Let's start with you, George.
Sustainability does cost a little bit more, but I think what it is thinking outside the box and working within a wireframe. So it's harder to kind of conceptualize what you want because you need to really stay in that box. Because if you love a fabric but you know it's coming from a polyester, you love it but you can't use it. So it's brainstorming and it's problem solving. But with customers, I think the thing with customers is we need to continue to push the educational part of how much something really costs. Because if you're getting a t-shirt $5 or £5, they don't realise how many hands have touched that t-shirt before it's got to the shop floor. And I'm talking about the cotton farmers, I'm talking about the yarn spinners, the knitters, the makers. There's so many hands, so if that lands at $5 or £5, there's something wrong there.
Is that anyone out there who's watching, if you haven't seen the true cost, it's a good starting point. I think that sums it up, that title sums up the true costs being paid by people on the planet. Would you agree? What do you feel about that, Jack?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also about moving away from those industry conventions where you sort of, when you're wholesaling to someone, your markup is 2 or 2.5 is 2.8. I think it's about really shifting the conversation around how much you give to each of those stages within the manufacturing of the clothing. Because even if you're not producing sustainably, someone is suffering, someone is bleeding behind it. So it's very much about addressing those ideas and thinking about how do you perhaps, you as a designer or you as the entrepreneur behind the company, you're not the richest man in the structure, but you're actually equally sharing that value with the supply chain and with everyone that is involved in that.
Brilliant. I mean, actually, that reminds me, if anyone here is familiar with the concept of degrowth, but that reminds me of a subject I hear a lot about in the conversation we have, which is degrowth, which is growth at all costs is the traditional capitalist business model, but now we want to use the stakeholder or multiple bottom line capitalism. But what would you say? Would you get asked this question, and how do you feel about the idea of growth or cost?
So I think when it comes to clients, like, why do we buy a brand? Because you fall in love with it, you want to be part of their philosophy. So it becomes much easier when you are a conscious brand to be able to communicate, narrate the story of where that material came from or where, how it was made. And with buyers, it's gonna, the wholesale price is gonna be higher, but if you narrate the story, it's gonna give them some leverage when they're in the retail store and the product is being sold. So you have to give them something to help with the retail and the final client selling service, I think.
And would you guys say that it comes down to actually the idea of redefine what luxury is? Luxury today is kindness. It's I often say that if you compare eating some amazing meal at a trattoria made by some incredible Italian grandmother to the McDonald's takeout, which one makes you feel better? Not just physically inside, but the whole experience. Would you say it's the same with fashion? I mean, it's that is a luxury, isn't it? To have things made that beautifully, with that much kindness. That's true luxury, not massive brands. And what about, do you guys feel about, Joe, a question for you, about how the information flow from, let's say you can sit with a buyer from, say, Farfetch or Match, whoever it might be, or a smaller boutique, and explain to them what goes into your product, how kind it is, how thoughtful it is, how circular it is, and how much better the planet is. And then you get this trickle-down effect. So I often do is I go to some stores which I know in the PRs would say, oh, it's really sustainable, so I'll go to the retail store and be like, oh, no, I think you're right. They're like, so we think that's organic, and you're like, okay, one of the issues here is that there's a very, very broken flow of information. Do you find that in your work?
Yes, absolutely. I think the world we live in today is all about the image we project. So for that reason, we're quite visual people when we're quite we're so used to this throwaway culture where everything has to be so quick, and we lose track of the value of things. So when your conversation starts to be a little bit too long, even when you're speaking to a buyer, they kind of start being not so interested anymore because they want to know how much they can sell of that. And so I think it's about shifting that narrative and thinking that not everything is scalable. So one of the things I work a lot with handmade, and a lot of the questions I get is, how do you scale that specific technique? How do you scale that specific process? And the answer is always the same, not everything is scalable. So it's really kind of moving away from the idea of every product is the same, and very much kind of embedding the narrative and focusing on the narrative. That's how perhaps you connect with that buyer in a completely different level that is just not product.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Josh, would you say the same about the fact that like limited edition runs a limit of the amount of, let's say, your raw materials are finite because they are much kinder and cleaner and they're like probably quite a lot more per meter to buy? Do you think, can you make that into a USP, do you think, so that both buyers and consumers understand that if there's a smaller amount, or it's not, as you say, not scalable, going back to my point about degrowth, is that something you can use positively, or is it still at the point where the industry is quite challenged by that?
No, you definitely can. I think you need to have your hands in a few baskets. We produce 50% bulk traditionally, 25% is on demand, so it's made only once the customer's made the purchase, gets into the factory within 10 days delivered, and 25% bespoke, handmade. So it's knowing that bespoke, you can't really upscale, but your bulk you can, so you've got to have those fractions. It's got to be commercial at the end of the day, because we need to continue to make good strides and trying to change the industry. But yeah, there's always a USP in handmade because that's the essence of clothing. It's the emotional part of clothing, hand making something. I worked in bespoke tailoring for 10 years, and you wait for 4 months for a suit. Cherish that suit, but now we don't have the emotional connection anymore with clothes because they're cheap. So we got to bring that back.
Good thinking, good point. And Bev, what about you?
Yeah, I would say the same as both of them. There is a comeback, I would have to say, in terms of craftsmanship and through, for example, my artisanal lab project. So the main collection is 100% ethically made in Italy, but then I do artisanal lab projects which focus on, let's say, using my brand as a bridge to communicate and showcase craftsmanship from different countries, and craftsmanship that consumers would not normally think about, that would be associated with that country. So, for example, in India, when you think of India and you think of craftsmanship, you think of beautiful silks and embroidery. And I've got a beautiful collaboration with artisans in the south of India that do knitwear. And when people listen to the story, they're like, "Gosh, wow, we didn't even realize that they do knitwear, especially in the south of India where it's always hot. So why would you have a mohair or silk, piece of knitwear?" So it's all about making sure, like I said before, that you have a narrative and there's a lot of authenticity behind it.
Thank you very much. I think we're probably nearly at time, aren't we? I think we'll just round this one out. I'd love to just ask, I'm going to ask everyone who I'm going to talk to tonight, if you had a magic wand, or you could be president of the whole planet for a day, and you could just affect change over the fashion industry, what would be the one thing, your big wish, your magic wand moment where you could be like, right, I change this and everything's going to be fine? What would it be? Jowie, you first. Put you right on the spot now. We can always just say this too.
It's a very tough one. Can I cast this one?
You can pause, we can come back to it.
Come back to me.
Any thoughts from you guys over
I
there?
can go respect. So, like my mantra, respect your body plus your sphere. I would hope that with one word, respect between people and respect for the environment.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But I also think that I wish consumers looked at independent brands in the eyes of, let's see, luxury brands. Because at the end of the day, it's the same product. Just we don't have the budget to bombard with advertising. So support independent brands, and you'll see a change because we'll take more market share.
Yeah, good. Here's the.
Yeah, I was going to speak up on respect as well, but I think togetherness is my one. In terms of if we don't do it together, there's no other way. So really, collaboration is key for us to sort of still have a future.
Great. Well, thank you all very much indeed. And we'll say thank you to these guys. And next up, we've got.
See if anyone has any questions afterwards, the drinks, you can speak to all of the designers individually. Okay.
Smither and Stuart Poole. Susie is founder of a fantastic jewellery brand that I've also been Google stalking. And I did slightly know about it before I had to confess, called Rockhound, which is very, very beautiful, really colourful and beautiful jewellery. And then Stuart is one of the world's great experts, from what I can tell, from also Google stalking him, on ethical gems. And so we'd love to talk to you guys about where the jewellery industry is now and where it's going, because I think in all the conversations I have and the meetings I go to, I think jewellery is one of the areas that always sits quite adjacent to fashion, has some things in common with it, but it has other things that's way more in common with other areas of manufacturing rather than fashion. You know, am I right in thinking that it's marketing and a lot of that ties in with luxury fashion, but actually when you drill down, the manufacturing and a lot of the processes are so different to textiles and other materials. So what would be, for both of you, what have been some of the biggest myths you had to dispel in your work? Stuart, let's start with you.
Okay. It's a great place to start because I feel like I'm the odd one out in the room, because we're talking all about sustainability, and you can't put, sustainable mining is a concept that doesn't really exist, because the things that we're pulling out of the ground took millions of years to form. You can't just grow them back as you can maybe with other materials that you can use in other areas of fashion. So I think that's the huge unambiguous disparity between the jewellery sector, and of course there's jewellery that's made from other materials, but if you're talking about the normal jewellery that we know and love, from gold and silver and platinum, using diamonds and sapphires and rubies and emeralds, then that is the huge difference.
And a question for you as well, Stuart. If you look at the statistics around comparing it to textiles, I read the other day that all the textiles that there are out there already, 90% of them, with the right either mechanical or chemical processes or chemical agents added, could be recycled, but currently only about between 1% and 10%, depending on the territory. Only 1% and 10% of textiles are recycled. So we're sitting on mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains of raw materials just sitting there rotting whilst we then make new ones, which is ridiculous. What is the comparable in the jewellery sector in terms of, I always think back to how jewellery is one of the most sustainable investments you can make if you want to buy luxury, because it can be, the metals can be used again, as can the stones, and they have been doing that for hundreds and hundreds of years. So do you think, is there a lot of jewellery out there you think that's sitting waiting to be given a second life, or do you think it's the jewellery industry is probably actually slightly ahead of fashion in that way?
I would say that that's where we win big time over the rest of the fashion sector, is that because the materials are intrinsically so valuable that no one is ever going to lose a small scrap of gold or platinum. The gemstones themselves have a less of a longevity, I think, because they're more easily damaged, but certainly on the metal side, we are fantastic recyclers. Every piece of gold that's ever mined still exists above ground somewhere.
Susie, do you use, I think you use a lot of recycled materials in gold and silver, particularly in your collections. Tell us about that.
So actually I've tried to move away from recycled gold because there's quite an opaqueness to where the gold comes from. And actually recently our industry's had a bit of a shake-up because it's been announced that Russia has a $420 billion stockpile of gold, which could easily enter the market, avoiding sanctions. So I choose to work with certified traceable gold, primarily fair trade gold, fully traceable back to the mines in Peru. Similar to the chocolate and the bananas, it's the same kind of principle. The miners are paid a fair price, and a premium goes back to the community as well, so they can use that as they see fit.
Okay.
So I got around that problem.
But how do you square that circle of? It must be a really tough one, because if you're thinking, okay, we could recycle gold that's out there already, which is what we should be doing with textiles and other materials, right? We could recycle what's out there rather than extracting more from the planet. But then by doing that, you could be, as you say, enabling and empowering. We could call it money laundering or something much worse. How do you square that circle? Because it's a hard one, and it's slightly more of a dilemma there.
So to me, you've got people and planet, and people have always been my drive. And so it's working with artisanal and small-scale miners. There's roughly 40 million artisanal miners around the world. Yeah, just making their living, just trying to feed their families. So by using recycled gold, you're ignoring that whole community there. So I'd rather engage with them and help invest in their community, buy their gold, buy their gemstones, you know, work with artisanal mines. So I'm rather engaged with the people.
Okay.
And as long as they're looking after their mine sites, they're not letting mercury leach into the water table, they are thinking about deforestation, you know, they're addressing all of those awful risks as well, then mining can be an okay, sustainable activity, not necessarily a sustainable practice.
Okay, yeah, then there is a difference.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And Stuart, I noticed obviously you've got two different platforms, 1948 and Moyo, and Moyo I understand means heart. So those are your two supplier bases that you help. How do you get around these conversations as well about, is it something that comes up in jewelry a lot, like you mine, then how do you, once the mine has extracted everything they can from that particular site, they then got to either flood that area back, repopulate it, bring back biodiversity and habitat. What kind of reassurance do you give from people who say, like, oh gosh, you know, if I buy your stones, you know, how can I guarantee they don't have any kind of bad footprint around them? What kind of conversations do you have, and what do you say to people with those concerns?
Right. So yeah, the two examples you mentioned there. So through 1948, I'm mostly sourcing gemstones from Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka has a very well-established gemstone mining industry. So there's a very formal structure there. The mine sites are very closely monitored. The restoration of the sites once the mining projects are finished is also closely regulated. So we are probably one of the best case examples there of artisanal mining across the world, where the mine sites are really, really well monitored and restored. So and they're also very small mines, so the actual footprint of the mine compared to, for example, say a typical diamond mine, is it's worlds apart.
Okay.
So the restoration is relatively straightforward, I would say, in that environment. Through Moyo Gems, it's slightly different. We're still working with artisanal miners, but I think that the industry is not so well developed there, and the structure is not so well developed. So we have to make improvements there for sure. I'm very open about that. The mine restoration is something that we're working on with the mining associations in Tanzania to make sure that that's done more consistently, shall we say.
Got it.
And better.
Got it. And how do you ever come up against some issues of corruption down there? Because I've read some things about the corruption that can take place, when you're that far from home and it's in a country a long way away where they don't have great infrastructure and the communications don't be quite as smooth and transparent. How do you get around that?
When I came into this industry, I really thought that because of the places where I'd be operating, and as you say, quite remote places in many circumstances, that I would encounter corruption more often than I have. And actually, it's been just a handful of times where we've had to negotiate that and really push back quite forcefully, which we always do, and that's our policy. In Tanzania, with Moyo Gems specifically, we're really fortunate because we're working with a fantastic team. It's a multi-stakeholder project. Lots of people involved in that, and we have a specific team that engage with the government. And so anything like that, those kinds of practices are pretty much snuffed out at the source. So we've been really fortunate. But absolutely, it does exist, and it needs to be addressed.
And if we go back to the question I asked the panelists who were on before you about the kind of, if you could write a love letter to the jewelry industry or wave a magic wand, both of you are doing things in a way that a lot of other jewelry brands and suppliers could only dream of doing. Like, you're doing it in a way that's extremely responsible and really leading the way. So what would you say to the rest of the industry? What are your takeaways? What are your mantras? What are your manifestos that mean that you are heads above and beyond?
So one of my bugbears is greenwashing, actually, and actually it's rife in the fashion industry and in the jewellery industry. Everyone seems to think making a small little change means you can be an ethical jeweller, but it goes so deeper than that. So yeah, just to make sure you're thinking about your whole brand, not just one source, not just your packaging, not just using recycled metals. You've got to do that 360 approach.
Good advice. And what about, though, just before you hand the microphone,
and
what about, how do you, of course, because every single one of those changes costs something, that's the pushback I always say.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so packaging costs more, this kind of gold, these kind of supply, or, stones or other materials with these certifications, they cost more, so how do you what would you advise brands that are coming up against that? Would you say, like, think about the longer term if you still want to be trading in 5 to 10 years?
I hate pricing. I hate pricing. If I could just give my jewellery away, I'd really happily do that. But that doesn't make me a good businesswoman. And actually, I think one of the problems is yeah, my materials cost more, but then if you're passing that on to your retailer, they're amplifying that.
Yeah.
So I'm still trying to get my head around that one, because if I'm working on a bespoke project, there's other ways of cutting costs down, and we can work towards someone's budget. But I don't want to overprice. I'd much rather it be the same price and I take the cut. I take the hit. But that, again, doesn't make me a very good businesswoman. So yeah, we're working on that.
Okay, and then lastly, just thinking about, back to the point I made about the mountains of unwanted textiles that are out there. I mean, sure, everybody here and on Instagram saw these dunes almost in the Atacama Desert. There was a lot around that late last year. So if the same thing exists in jewellery, which would be less visible as that particular image we had of the Atacama Desert, but what would you say to people who are interested, consumers who are interested in taking a more stable approach around jewellery? So if they're buying vintage jewellery, they want to maybe consider reworking it, or they have stones that were handed down, or pieces that have been handed down, or how can consumers contribute to this change as well as industry?
That is true recycling. Like, how beautiful is it to get your grandmother's wedding ring, for instance, and then make it into a piece that you're actually going to wear, rather than having it kept in a box, kept in the dark. So that's, to me, that's true recycling. And it just keeps the family message. Jewellery is a beautiful way of holding that family message. So yeah.
And what are the pitfalls in upcycling previous pieces of jewellery? I mean, like, resetting stones, taking the metals, and someone else goes and gets them melted down. Like, what are the kind of the challenges or the things to watch out for?
Well, in the industry of now the kind of certified gold, casters are very used to keeping gold separate. So they'll happily melt down someone's specific gold, or I can just do it in my own workshop. You have to always check the carat though. Sometimes if it's not been hallmarked in this country, it might not have been verified as that specific carat, but that is something that can be addressed. But gemstones, like old cut diamonds, they're just some of the best. Actually, the way they sparkle in like candlelight is way nicer than a brilliant cut diamond, I think. So yeah, go look through all your relatives' jewellery and see if there's anything special out there. Yeah.
We're probably at time now. Yeah, well, listen, thank you both very much indeed. It was fascinating.
Thank you.
So we are looking for Johannes, Leonie and Maz. Do I have you guys here? Welcome. We're missing Maz.
Just to say, Osman is being held back. He is coming, so we're just changing the orders.
We're having a little reshuffle. Don't look too much of a screen. Okay, so pivoting to ethical and sustainable fashion, supply chain and production. In front of me I've got Maz from Escatex, I've got Leonie from Tencel, who are part of this event tonight, and Johannes, who's got a beautiful fashion label which I've seen downstairs in the concept store Fabrica X this afternoon when I grew. So it's a really, really complex one to unravel: ethical and sustainable fashion, supply chain and production. So let's start with you, Johannes. From looking at your clothing, it's extremely beautifully crafted, and I've noted in my Google stock that it's hand-dyed, cruelty-free silk. The textiles are all hand-finished. You were originally from Germany, but you live in London, and you use couture craftsmanship.
Yes.
What have I missed? I'm sure I've missed lots of things. Tell us a bit more about you.
Yeah, so you actually gave a brilliant introduction. So I have, similar to Bob Taylor and the other designers speaking earlier, a sustainable angle to the fashion that I create. I think one thing that is usually missing in haute couture, more performative brands, which I would say that's what I'm currently doing. Very performative pieces that I usually custom ordered by artists or private clients for events. I think within that sector, sustainability is really a rarity still. So I think implementing the couture techniques and the essence of sort of crafted and bespoke piece of work is, I think, coming from the couture angle, and then from, in terms of textiles, I work with Tencel Luxe, cruelty-free silk, and anti-aging. So it combines sustainable processes with the sustainability of something being bespoke and being made for custom and to order. So yeah.
Okay. It's interesting you mentioned this because I've been doing a lot of red carpet styling for many years, and literally just if I've got bags under my eyes, because I was doing the Downton Abbey premiere last night, and it was a late night. I was dressing Elizabeth McGovern, who was introduced to me by Olivia Firth quite some years ago, and Olivia said to Elizabeth, look, you should do a sustainable wardrobe for your next tour of your next big movie, and if you want to work with someone, I could suggest Mary. So Elizabeth and I have been working really closely on trying really hard to embed sustainability into her tour wardrobe, which is really easy when she's sitting doing a press junket or an appearance on the Today Show. But last night she walked the red carpet, and every time we do red carpet, we find that it is really hard to find incredibly crafted evening wear, and really lavish, beautiful things that you'd expect to see on Bond Street in the windows from Chanel or Gucci or Prada. And Yanis, why do you think that is? Why do you think that sustainable fashion still has an image of being kind of easy, very neutral colour palette, daily wear, and leisure wear sectors are catching up? There's great underwear out there, shoes and bags, you can get plant-based leathers, but the couture and evening wear end seems to be behind. Why do you think that is?
I think part of the reason is obviously because there are limited textile companies providing the materials, so that's why Tencel Luxe is so special. Because we need, for example, silk has a specific way of draping, has specific transparency sometimes. So working with couture fabrics really is, I think, hard if you if they're out there in a sustainable way. But I think what companies could anyway look more into is also upcycling. So I can mix between like upcycled materials as well as Tencel Luxe cruelty-free silk. So I mix between sustainable materials, and I think so. A is the textiles, and B, I think sustainability is traditionally associated with a certain aesthetic, and I think that has to be changed by designers. So I think by making it a bit more maybe performative, or people would say maybe glamorous, I think it can give it a little bit of a different connotation that people feel invited to buy into, and I think attracted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like that was the challenge we had with this dress that Elizabeth wore last night on the carpet, which was had the skirt needed to be remade for the dress that couldn't fit at all. And so I said, well, let's just use upcycled velvet. And eventually we looked and we found a place called Move Fabrics in New York, and they supplied us with an old black velvet that was from Marc Jacobs' collection several years ago, and he hadn't used it all. So I mean, it's doable, right?
Yeah.
But so that's an interesting point you make about mixing upcycled fabrics with something like Tencel Luxe. And with that, we're going to come on to Leonie from Tencel. Leonie, can you help those out there in this room or wider out on Instagram who don't know enough about Tencel, the difference between Tencel's core product range and Luxe range? Can you tell us a bit about what Tencel is?
Actually, this is one of the most complicated questions because it's quite complex what Tencel is and the difference. And so basically, at the source of Tencel, there's sustainably managed forest as renewable wood sources that are chopped up into wood chips that are dissolved later in the process with an organic solvent into pulp, which later is processed through nozzles in an environmentally sound closed loop process into either cables that are cut into staple fibers, which would be the Tencel product, Tencel fibers that come in different lengths, of course, and finenesses, and are sold in bales. And Tencel Luxe is produced in the same closed loop process, but in the end of the process are finer nozzles, so the result would be an endless filament that comes really close to the fineness of silk, for example. And that's why we also make a difference between cotton-like comparisons when we come to Tencel and silk-like comparisons when we talk about consumers.
That's good. Hands up here who knows what a closed-loop manufacturing process is, truthfully. Anyone? It is quite complicated. This is one of I find it really interesting. I'd like to touch on that because I think that a lot of people say, what's circularity? What is closed-loop manufacturing? And I think it's always good for anyone watching out there who's curious is to look at how Mother Nature works, right? If you look at, let's say, you've got a tree, the leaves fall, they become compost, there's a bird sitting on the branch, the bird goes to the loo, that becomes fertilizer for what goes on underneath the tree. Then they will rot and become compost, seeds come in, and on you go. So it's this wonderful kind of circular process where nothing ever goes to waste in nature, and that's kind of similar to what you're talking about, isn't it? This closed loop manufacturing process where you just keep everything going round and round and round. And so your solvents that you use to make this pulp, presumably you said they're organic, so they wouldn't get flushed out of the water table and release any
Exactly, it's 99.8% are recovered and reused of water and the solvent.
That's really good. Thank you very much for explaining that. And Maz, on to you. So tell us about Escotex. Have I pronounced it right?
Yeah, Escotex. So we partnered with Tencel Luxe quite recently, but we've been working with you guys for over a year now. But we basically wanted to come together to offer sort of sustainable materials much more accessibly. I sort of come from a menswear background and just felt like it was a really elitist industry, and my co-founder, who's with us, Steve, has been working with lots of these sort of like larger brands, and it is really frustrating when you get a lot of smaller brands coming and there isn't a route like for them to be able to use these amazing innovations. And so that's really where we began, and Tencel Luxe was really exciting for us because we were on a very similar mission. And it was great to sort of be working with sort of a lot of independent designers and really focusing that so that it isn't elitist anymore and we can make it accessible to everybody, but also comes with that a lot of traceability, and that's really where we sort of came together and really sort of harmonized our sort of journey to make this happen for everyone, because it needs to happen everywhere, not just high street, as I said, or sort of larger brands. So that's our main focus really.
That's fantastic. And one of the things I get a lot of feedback about from brands out there is the minimum order quantities, because you want to order much cleaner materials. A, they're more permeable because they're being made beautifully rather than badly, but also these MOQs, they're called, are challenging. So how do you exactly get around that at Escotex?
We have sort of a range of different ways of getting around it. There's sort of on our platform, sort of very accessibly and easily, it's just sort of ways for you to engage with fabrics that are ones that we have sort of together either with Luxe or just through sort of a lot of research that we've done with various brands that I've worked in here with as well that I can see, that we just sort of have brought in sort of main sort of staple items that will help smaller designers really get off their feet and really get the journey going. And we sort of listen to their demand, and especially when we were launching during COVID, we learned a lot to maybe not listen to the trends and really just listen to our designers and what they were wanting, because all of that sort of trend research for that period of time kind of went out the window with COVID. So we were really just listening to the industry and trying to engage and react to that in sort of real time and try and get these things. So just growing the collection sort of month by month and bit by bit to kind of understand that. And we introduced digital print really early on, so we really feel like it's what I hate about sustainability is a lot of people who maybe aren't in the fashion industry really think that it has to be sort of well, I'm wearing sort of a very classic, I'm going to make this up for now, but sort of, very wishy-washy and undyed, sort of, not a lot of creativity. And what I really love about some of the designers we work with is that they really want to express that. And so by opening those doors and having sort of even digital print facilities that allow them to do that, and in our team we're also working sort of dyed in the UK routes to even just expand our range so that we're not having to bring in bigger quantities from the mills, but we're really developing that and various other sort of cool innovations, not sure how many I can talk about, but just sort of going on to make it as accessible and as creative for people, because that's where you can bridge the gap really and get people to invest a bit more in sustainability. Is if it looks and feels as good as everything else, but also has that deeper, richer meaning. So just trying to bring those together. So that's how we've kind of gone around. We do bring in bulk into our studio, and we sort of help people in their sampling processes, but if they're looking for something more specific, then we kind of develop with either the Luxe team or with our mills directly, what people are looking for, and really just help them get through that production process, especially as the world's changing with Brexit and much more UK manufacture going on. So we're trying to sort of focus on that and really streamline that for our brands.
So if I was a brand that didn't know about Escotex, how would you define yourself? As a marketplace or an agent or an intermediary between sustainable materials and fabric suppliers and the brand? Or?
Yeah, such a lot of different things. I do a lot of educational stuff as well. I'm at London College of Fashion, doing some education stuff there for next semester. And so we're doing a lot of education. I've been sort of doing that around the UK and sort of touring that and a bit in America as well. And so it's nice to sort of be providing that education because we see it as so critical for the fashion industry and for the future of that. So we offer that kind of side to it and sort of sort of deeper, sort of richer consulting services through both my co-founders who have amazing lifetime experience in the textile industry. And so sort of that, but then also just like an easy, accessible marketplace where you can just go off and develop, because I get that sometimes when you're coming into it and you're just wanting to start, it can be a bit intimidating to not know where you're going. So getting all the paperwork and getting everything just there for you, and being able to kind of experiment yourself is really what we help some of you guys do. So,
who has worked with Esther?
Brilliant.
And in terms of where we are now, a question for all of you. Let's start with you, Leonie. And where we are now in sustainability and fashion, where we're going. I mean, where would you like to see Tencel and the rest of the industry in, let's say, 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? You know, if we carry on as we are, you know, what's the dream?
Yeah, it's interesting also that you say Tencel, because Tencel Luxe and Tencel we are a little bit different, because Tencel Luxe is more the innovation at the moment. It's been launched 4 years ago, and so if we say in 10 years, then of course I wish that Tencel Luxe is as well known as Tencel, because Tencel really established itself in the last 30 years. It's the 30 years anniversary this year, and so I hope, of course, that we also manage to be in as many collections, and but with a different approach. At the moment, we are really focusing more on emerging designers, but also on haute couture a lot, also established haute couture, and we really try to combine technology also with older values like hand craftsmanship, and new approaches are really, for me, combining innovation with really sustainable methods of creating, and this would go also into smaller runs of collections. And so I hope that we can create more solutions like aesthetics and make the fabrics available for emerging brands, or also smaller brands who have different approaches to production.
That's really interesting, thank you. I'm not sure, is there a percentage right now where you could say, if I was to go into Selfridges or go on Farfetch tomorrow morning, and how much roughly percent do you think of the clothing I could see there would contain Tencel or Tencel Luxe right now, do you think, roughly? Hard to say, hard number. Let's say if we said, for argument's sake, I'm just going to put a number out of the air, 5%, for example.
For Tencel Luxe, it's really easy to say, because we are so new in the market. And so now, in the first phase, we really worked on developing new fabrics. First, we had to create the fabrics to present them to designers. So this is now, I think we have around 1,000 fabrics on the market now, and this is not a big number yet. So it's really to make them available. So it's a big step to really be in store in the end. So we have first collections now. For example, Osman is in Selfridges, and there are a couple of collections also coming out via Aesthetics, and but it's more at the moment early adapters who use it. And what was really great for us is, for example, Victor and Rolf in haute couture. They really wanted to use Tencel Luxe, so it took us almost a year to develop the right fabrics for them. And in January in haute couture, they launched the first collection. They used a lot in their looks. And last week during the bridal fashion week, they showed a couple of styles made of looks, and so on. They want to incorporate more into their collection and really replace more and more fabrics. And this is kind of what we're also working towards. It's profound and deeper relationships with the brands, and finding solutions for them, and also supporting them in applying more sustainable treatments, for example. So it is really a close relationship that's important for us.
Okay, and Johannes, I mean, if you could wave a magic wand as well, and as someone who designs incredible evening wear and version of couture, what else would you like to see out in the marketplace? Like, imagine if you got told that you could take over Chanel tomorrow and replace Carl, right? What would you like to see out there in the marketplace that would mean that creating these much more kind of fantastical and lavish and decadent and beautiful pieces of evening wear would be possible? What do you think is missing, and what would you like to see there?
Well, I think, first of all, I think in the fashion industry in general, I think the seasonal shows and the very strict boundaries, I think, are still a problem. I think it needs to blend all a little bit more. I think it would be incredible if big fashion houses especially wouldn't feel pressure to have like 6 collections a year and so much overproduction. I think especially in the luxury market like with Chanel, I think shows that have limited amounts of looks and we're focusing on the quality rather than the quantity. And as I think the speakers before said, I think taking the responsibility for yourself and also like really looking into the mirror and being honest with yourself. I think, am I doing something ethical here? Is this what's good for the world and benefiting everyone? So I think everyone needs to look inwards, but then also come together to kind of drive change. And that's also kind of what my work is about. It's a lot about human connection and the idea that we're very much virtually connected nowadays, but not so much physically. So work with sensory elements and as well as fabrics that feel very nice on the skin and move very well. So I think it's also partially the concept and the identity of those collections and the brands that drive that mind to change, not just the material change. So I think, there's a lot of different factors that could change, I think. But I think the biggest one is probably breaking down that pressure of creating in a certain schedule and also the quantity of it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have time. We could go on longer.
Osman's not here. He had to go back to Paris, so the next one will be Steyr and Osman, but we're. Why don't we? I think kick it to them and Osman can join maybe. He said 10 past, but it's now 4 past.
All right. Well, I mean, I can help. Has anyone here got any questions for these guys? Anyone about curiosity? What's your name?
Tanya.
Tanya.
So, I'm from Love Hero, but what I wanted to ask, this is kind of to everybody really. I feel like we have this conception that fast fashion is what we kind of see on the high street, but you kind of touched upon that really it's these luxury houses that are producing so much. We don't look at that as fast fashion.
You're right.
And I almost feel like that needs to swap in the way that we think about it, because we do kind of fast fashion, cheap, but really luxury houses are the ones that are also, even though people think it's exclusive, when you really consider how many collections, how vastly they're distributed, it's so hard. It's fast fashion. Just more expensive.
Question. How
do you feel about that?
Is
that true, or am I just going crazy?
No, I think you've got a point. If you look at LVMH, who do produce some very, very beautiful things, a $10 billion company. How do you get to 10 billion turnover by producing responsibly, even at that level? Maz, what would you say about that? I mean, in terms of, do you find that the very top of the tree, the luxury sectors of Kering and Richemont and LVMH, where do you think they are in terms of villains and heroes?
I completely agree with you. And I think I had this conversation with my co-founder just last week, and he was just saying it's a higher markup that they put on their garments. So, it's not necessarily the same fabric, but, the markup is considerably higher. It's just the volumes that allow these high street brands to do it, but it doesn't mean that these sort of luxury brands are creating volumes too. So, I very much agree with you. But
Lily, what about you? Have you found I don't know enough about your business model and your strategy for sales, but have you found there to be too much pushback when you've tried to penetrate some of the bigger luxury groups or even independent luxury brands, owned by Capri Holdings as opposed to, say, LVMH? Have you found pushback there? Or do you think they're doing, Kering have a huge sustainability hub, they have an amazing amount of innovation at a group level, I find less on a brand level, but how have you found your experience in dealing with those kind of entities?
Actually, there's a lot of interest, and so we had really nice talks as well, but of course they're a little bit less fast in their decision making as well, so we really need early adopters like as well who really bring innovations into their collections and are really ready to try out how alternatives might work, and so this is what I see as a difference is really the decision making.
Okay, interesting. And Josh, how do you feel about that? Do you think that luxury fashion is also has it got blood on its hands like Primark?
Well, maybe not like Primark, but I think what it has. It totally depends on the brand as well. I think it's very subjective on which brand we look at, but I think overall, I mean, luxury items depends on your income, I guess, but I think I usually cherish a little bit more than the very fast high street fashion items. So in a way, it is in that sense a little bit more sustainable by just being more valuable. I think also with more with a higher price usually also comes a little bit better quality of materials and finishings, and I know from experience the team in luxury companies is a very highly skilled design team and development team, so I think overall it has a sort of sustainable, it's more sustainable in the sense that they produce maybe higher quality products that you would like to keep and don't wear every day, so it's a bit more like longevity. But then again, I think because the price point is higher, why don't we see more sustainability? Because I think the challenge to sustainability is that it is so hard to make it cheap. So I think when you can have that markup in that price point, so then you can afford to have researchers hunting for upcycled parachutes, or so I think there's a lot that can be done still, and I think the higher the budget, the more possibilities there are to be sustainable. So in a way, I totally agree that it should be way more looked at.
I think there's 2 points as well to consider here. Is if you always look at fashion, the middle and bottom layer of the pyramid of fashion takes its cues from the top of the pyramid, right? So there's a responsibility, I think, would you agree, coming with being at the top. And second of all, as you pointed out, Gabriella Hearst has shown a great example, as have Chloe, who she designs for as well, who are now B Corp certified. And you're right, if they're the ones making the most expensive clothing in the market, they could really influence the rest of the market by it. Would you agree with embedding sustainability? And the other thing we talked earlier with Josh and Jao about, when you have smaller limited edition runs, right? Like, that can also be a desirability thing. Or couture is, you get one of that particular item if you buy a dress at $50,000 or whatever, but surely the idea of small batches, limited editions is exclusive in and of itself. So that, in a way, is luxury. So that just goes back to the point about your luxury, right? Any other questions from anyone? Please.
Hi, I'm Marina from Positive Luxury. We've covered a little bit like the inaccessibility to luxury in terms of pricing. However, there's an aspect of luxury that I think is still quite widespread nowadays, that is the elitism that comes with status. So the idea that a luxury item kind of carries a status with it, and it's only accessible not only through pricing, but it's typically a very small niche of population that have access to it in most cases. So if, for instance, these luxury brands have a sustainability strategy, do you believe that this elitism aspect of it is an impediment to these brands kind of having an influence on the actual bigger population? Or do you think like maybe these brands have a duty towards more accessible consumers? What's your position on that?
I'm going to nominate Matt, but she hasn't spoken for a few minutes.
I'm just going to believe this.
Do you want to just summarise your question again?
So what is the role that elitism from more of a status perspective of the luxury branding have in sustainability, and whether there's like kind of a responsibility of luxury to influence more accessible brands? Because obviously like luxury only covers a very small percentage of the consumers, so even if all luxury is sustainable, that's 1% of the population that will have sustainable clothing.
Yeah. I mean, I think I will begin this, and I think Johannes will probably be able to follow on something quite good from it. But I think obviously the marketing for luxury brands is so different to high street brands. So the message in which we're sharing is completely different, and I don't personally see a lot of marketing or from these luxury brands that are maybe shouting as much as the high street brands are about the change that they're making. And I appreciate that it's difficult for both, but it's very different in their marketing strategies. So for me, I'm doing the fabrics, I'm back in, I'm right at the beginning of the supply chain, so it's hard for me to comment, but in terms of what marketing I do see, it is a completely different perspective. So it's hard for me to comment, but I don't know what you think on furthering that. It is different to what you see sort of high street brands saying that they're doing. I know there's a lot of greenwashing, a lot of claiming and stuff, and it's probably considerably better to not be seeing you know, the same sort of stuff coming from these luxury brands, and that's maybe what they can keep their dignity a bit in sort of the journey that they're going through in sustainability. But I do think that the communication is really different, and that's because, again, kind of at the point we were covering earlier, the difference between high street and luxury is so split. But I don't know if you have anything to
Yeah, I think two things. I think first of all, I think obviously luxury houses have always influenced high street brands, and I think just in terms of design and message, like we always see like a version of Balenciaga in one of those high street shops, and I think it's because the luxury sector really drives cultural change a lot of times in terms of design, and I think that's something when designers have that power of driving that change, then of course it's a responsibility. So you definitely have to be aware of that, and then by implementing sustainable techniques and processes, you will be able to influence that market as well. So yes, I think, and the second thing as well, I think though that the high street market could also maybe look more into what we had in the 1920s or something, where someone would maybe get a custom suit made and wear that for like the evening events, rather than running through high street shops and like purchasing 10 of them. I think maybe there could also be an appreciation on the more high street level consumer for something custom, and because at the end of the day you can also afford the same type of quality if you just have less of it maybe. So I don't know, yeah.
I think finances have all to play here, because if you could make really good payment plans around investing in sustainable fashion, right? So if you, rather than spending £100 one-off on a suit for that even when you talk about, imagine if over the next 2 years you could spend £30 a month paying off, then you've got that amazing suit. That's a whole other conversation, but it's a very good point. Thank you for such a good question. And with that, we will move on to our final trio. Now that we've got Osman here.
Sorry,
welcome, Osman.
My fault.
I'll say thank you very much to Maz. Osman, come and sit. And Anna, if you'd like to come up, and Ciela. You can't touch anywhere you like. Well, so on to our final talk of the evening, and then it's going to soon be time to go and to join Osman and have a glass of wine and a snack downstairs. I will start with introducing everybody here. I've known this one since his very first collection when I was a sort of photocopying and copy making junior at British Vogue.
Very glamorous.
And Osman did his first collection, and we all gasped at the beauty of it and the poetry of it, and how actually truly timeless his things were, and how remarkable his story was, and how original his voice was. So it's really a pleasure to be sat up next to you again after knowing you for so long. He has a luxury women's ready-to-wear brand that is sold in how many countries?
Less than less.
You're more selective.
Actually,
Yeah, quite right.
I want to make less stuff.
Yeah, quite right, okay. And Osman, sort of one of his big routes to success he was very selective about the women he dressed. So he always traditionally dressed these extremely clever, brilliant, thinking women, a lot from the art world. So I've always associated you with being very discerning and making these very beautiful, sort of almost like wearable art, but not in a way that sounds like a three-legged trouser or a, hoodie back to front or something like that. They're very beautiful, his things. And on to, we have Ciela and Anna here. And Ciela has a Colombian base, originally Colombian, but the brand is based in Colombia, or it's partly based here too, isn't it?
It's based here.
It is based here. Yes, and it's what I noticed about Ciela's work is that there's so many aspects of clean materials and clean inputs that we're going to come on to. And then the other, as we have here, is Anna from Likovskaya, I got it nearly right, who in a very timely way, and also there's a bittersweet note, this is a Ukrainian brand. So thank you, Jonathan. Lily herself couldn't be here because I think there was her plane got turned around.
I was actually talking to her beforehand, and on behalf of her, she's really sorry she cannot be here today. She was literally on the way from Milan to London to be here and to do the speech but unfortunately her plane had to circle around for like an hour and then had to land back in Milan. So unfortunately, I wish you would have listened to her, not me, but I will do my best to replace her.
And the theme of this particular segment is a creative life for adversity. So I think what's wonderful about where we're sitting in King's Cross, which is right next to the Eurostar, and it's sort of, we're almost practically half abroad here, right? We've got three brilliant designers here who have such incredibly global mixes in terms of being based here or having a foot in the door in England. And you've got Ukraine, Colombia, and Pakistan, exactly. And
Birmingham,
and I think it's part of what makes British fashion so interesting, is stories like all of yours. And I mean, the theme is adversity, so I'd love to find out from you guys, what has been the adversity in your journeys as fashion designers, and how do you overcome them? Osman, let's start with you.
God.
We can come back to that.
Yeah, maybe I think
We'll come back to you.
you won't me.
And why don't you?
Yeah.
Right now, of course, with Ukraine.
Okay.
This is.
Yeah, I think this topic is very, especially now, is very important to the whole Ukraine. And with Litkovskaya brand, I know Litkovskaya for many years. I've actually been her first client, she for the past few years already she has been working in between Kiev and Paris. She has been showcasing in Paris, and she's been she's coming from the family of the fourth generation of tailoring, and that's why for her it was so always important to preserve this profession and all the craftsmanship that is coming within that. And it was always so important for her to bring the Ukrainian tradition into the modern context, and how she can showcase her where she's coming from and with all the traditions, but on the global scheme. She actually, the sustainable line that she created a few years ago, which is called Artisanal, the pieces that you can see downstairs, was actually inspired by Ukrainian tradition. And the idea of that is that she's taken all the small little pieces from, for example, previous collections or vintage clothing, and she sends them to the Ukrainian villages, to the Carpathian mountains, to the female artisans who's got their 100-year-old machines, and they're woven this fabric. Wow. And then out of this fabric, they're creating clothes. So every single garment is coming with a passport of how long it took to create this piece. So usually it takes 80 hours to create just one piece.